this tends to be a really good opportunity for them to kind of help get them back in control of their inventory. And the biggest thing is when you use it with one tray, especially when these Makos cost as much as they do, because the facility has to buy the Makos. That's not something that's provided by the vendor. They provide the vendor trays, not the robotics. So if you can use it more efficiently, we can turn it over in an hour and a half from decontam all the way through to sterilization, and that's all it takes on average, then I can do a lot more with what I already own versus having to buy more, store more, and figure out how to operate. So there's a lot of avenues this really can help the users.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
On today's Vendor Spotlight, we will speak with Kyle Kemp, National Director of Business Development with IST1 Tray. We have done several of these podcasts over the years with the IST1 Tray team, but we've never spoken with Kyle. And what's great about our discussion today is Kyle is actually out there in the field doing it. He is taking trays from 7 down to 3. He's working with the vendor representatives. He's working with SPD. He's working with the OR, the surgeon, and the nursing staff. He's going to tell us all about how he does it. He's going to give us some great examples today. And so stay with us. I'm excited to talk to Kyle. He's up next.
From the studios at Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Kyle Kemp, National Director of Business Development with IST1 Tray, joining me today. We've done a series of these vendor spotlights with IST1 Tray. And today we're going to be talking about getting a greater understanding of just how easy it can be to reduce the number of vendor trays and thereby creating new efficiencies and reducing the reprocessing workload. Nobody better to talk to us about this though, Kyle. You're doing the work out there in the field. And so, we're going to give some real world examples. We're going to talk through that, really just hear it from somebody who's made this, a big part of what you do on an ongoing basis to support IST1 Tray customers. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin.
Kyle, let's start with just, a background on the company, and then we'll talk, a little bit more about you, but we've talked a lot about the total solution. And I know today we'll be focusing on one tray and EZ-TRAX, but, in the total solution, there's also one cart. Can you talk about how all of these work together and maybe what the vision for the company is, especially because the landscape is changing and a lot more of these procedures are getting pushed, into surgery centers?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We tried to develop 3 products that could kind of revolutionize the state of sterile processing, working with the OR and then the transportation element between all of those facets. So with one cart specifically, it's a vertical integration of a cart rather than typical case carts that you see that don't allow for the footprint to be really maximized or create some efficiency in that realm as well. So not only do it with the one tray with the speed, the EZ-TRAX with the reorganization, and then also with the one cart and then how we're able to transport things.
Yeah, I've seen the one cart and it just does take up so much less square footage, but you can get a lot. And so if you've got narrow hallways or you've got smaller procedure rooms, it can be a huge advantage for you there. I know we're going to focus on one tray and EZ-TRAX, but I thought, as the National Director of Business Development, you could talk to us about your role because, a big part of bringing a product to market or a solution to market is being able to make it usable and making it work. And so there's a lot about EZ-TRAX and one tray that is kind of new for anybody who's been using, more standard modalities in the past. And so you've got to kind of help them re-envision what this can look like. So talk about what that role is like for you, not just like, the cookie cutter terms, but what are you doing on a daily basis?
Well, it's a great question, Justin. And it varies. I wish there was a one-stop shop, a real easy way to kind of navigate the boats on the waters, if you will. But last week, for example, I was with a facility almost the whole week, and we built EZ-TRAX from the ground up, making it very customizable for a specific surgeon group. So the entire surgeon group can streamline and use that system, where we saved them 2 trays per case on a hip. So now they're only processing 4 trays, including their power and general hip instrumentation as well. And then for the knee, we saved them 3 trays. And then we put everything into 1 tray. And I think we saved about 1 hour and 55 minutes was the total cycle time. So, kind of a revolutionary thing. And that's kind of week to week what I do. You just kind of give me all the information of what the facility is doing or the surgeons are doing or however I can help. And then I'll kind of shape it with, A, what the products can do, but B, where my experience comes into play and how we can create the most efficient system that's out there for both sterile processing, the OR, the surgeons. It touches everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you're pretty much working with every key stakeholder in surgical services. And we're going to dive into this more. You mentioned, surgeons and kind of the nursing staff, but obviously sterile processing plays a big part in that, as do the vendor representatives themselves. So we're going to get deeper into that as we do some more case studies and kind of walk through just how easy it can be to create these efficiencies in your organization. But let's talk about just, the need here, right? Generally speaking, everybody knows, the volume of workload has been going up significantly due to a number of demographic factors. But sort of putting some pressure on that is also the fact that staffing remains an ongoing challenge, just getting qualified workforce, trained workforce, retaining workforce. And there's a lot of competition, at the pay scale, especially in sterile processing, whereas nurses are, just hitting an age where so many are retiring. And so there's less of them. And so it's just creating a lot of pressure on surgical services while there's an aging population that's demanding more procedures. The two aren't jiving. And so when you talk about saving 2 hours of time, it's almost like kind of a survival mechanism at this point, I would imagine, in your opinion.
Yeah. And it's crazy too, because sterile processing is one of those spaces where innovation doesn't come as often as everyone would love it to come. And when it does come, there's always a caveat to it, it seems like. Whereas with our system, it's 2 hours faster on average, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending on, your facility itself, but it's just more efficient. And then with EZ-TRAX that we bring in, we're able to take, 7, 8, 15 trays and completely reorganize that and have less amount of trays to process through every case, especially for orthopedics and spine and some other specialties. It just kind of becomes a difference maker and something that was never afforded an option before. I mean, this is something that's not really been done. Our biggest competition, we like to joke about it a little bit, is a wire basket. Can you just throw everything in a wire basket and make it happen, which is for its own issue, a whole bunch of complications that shouldn't happen. But that's just the way it is. So we've kind of entered this space into something that we didn't know we were going to get into spine. We didn't know we were going to get cataracts, retinas, be able to save all these different procedure types as well, because there's individual blue wrap things. And now you can just throw it into one and roll. Whereas, before we were really just concentrating on the orthopedic space. And don't get me wrong, that's a huge avenue for us, but it's becoming more than we ever thought. But anything we can do to help out the industry and create efficiencies, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, and there's cost savings too, and we're gonna kind of walk through that. Once a customer recognizes the opportunity to increase their efficiency, so they reach out to you and they say, "Yeah, I'd like to kind of work together." Like, what are some examples, I'd say, of the amount of trays that can be reduced, the time savings, the space savings, the cost savings? Like, can we walk through those? Like, maybe give me a specific example that everybody's familiar with, maybe in the ortho space, about just the number of trays. Let's start there, and then we can go into cost and time savings.
Perfect. So one of the biggest things out there, especially with orthopedics, And with robotics as well as obviously the Mako, right? Almost every facility is pretty at least familiar with the Mako. And that's typically about 7 trays. That's the Mako handpiece, the arrays, and then the triathlon instrumentation that's needed from Stryker to be able to do a knee case, total knee replacement. So when that's done, you've got a couple trays on site. Maybe some are loaned or some are consigned, but it's really about 7 trays that go into this. And with our system, we can bring it down to 3. It's with EZ-TRAX. It's really that simple. And then on the one tray side, if you utilize the one tray system, then the total processing time, we don't have a dry or cool time associated with it. It's not necessary. We have shelf life. So with that being said, it's done in 20 minutes and it's ready to go to the OR. If you want to keep it on the shelf for later use, that's something that can be done as well. So it's just between both ends of it, having half the amount of sets, less than half the amount of sets to be able to run. And in the process of one tray, it just creates a whole new dynamic.
So are you removing instruments to get it from 7 trays down to 3 trays, or what's the magic sauce?
So it kind of depends. In a lot of the times that we are implementing this, that is part of it, but we can do it without it. So the biggest thing that we do versus other vendor trays is they're made out of a denser, more heavier material than our anodized aluminum EZ-TRAX. So we can save weight right off the bat from a case comparison to a case comparison. But you can also go ahead and just reorganize things. Instead of having empty space, it's notorious in those vendor trays, we remove all that. There is less organization as a whole. There's not a specific place to put necessarily every individual instrument. Sometimes multiple instruments are put in one compartment. But the reality of it is we're able to get rid of that negative space. We're still under 25 pounds every time it's run, including the container weight. And we're ready to go in that efficiency within, that 20 minutes of total sterilization time.
That's really important what you just said. EZ-TRAX isn't adding weight to the tray that is kind of undermining its ability to reduce the number of trays. It's actually contributing to lighter weight to create more room for instruments while keeping them, still organized. That's very smart. I think that's an important point that you just made there. So if you have 5 Mako knee system trays and you're going from 7 down to 3 for each system, that's 20 physical trays from the inventory. So that's pretty significant when you're looking at, sterile storage or, even as you're, setting up for the case and for the OR and the amount of work that's happening in sterile processing to prepare the trays for sterilization. It seems like a pretty big deal to me.
I could agree with you more. I was there last week at a facility doing exactly that. And we got rid of a whole storage rack. Just now it's completely free. It's, and it's an ASC, right? So things are coming from the outside. There's a lot of consignment. There's a lot of loaners. There's a ton of case volume. Things change day to day. And for them, storage is a really big deal because none of these not none, I apologize, but the majority of the ASCs that are out there aren't built for the case volume that they're getting now, nor the amount of trays that it takes to do a case. I mean, orthopedics are moving more and more into the ASCs, complex spine procedures, you name it. That's just kind of the way that the entire industry is moving. And it's very difficult to keep up before it became more complex. And then now it's just getting worse. And it's like, what do we do? Hands are thrown up. Nobody knows. This tends to be a really good opportunity for them to kind of help get them back in control of their inventory. And the biggest thing is when you use it with one tray, especially when these Makos cost as much as they do, because the facility has to buy the Makos. That's not something that's provided by the vendor. They provide the vendor trays, not the robotics. So if you can use it more efficiently, we can turn it over in an hour and a half from decontam all the way through to sterilization, and that's all it takes on average, then, I can do a lot more with what I already own versus having to buy more, store more, and figure out how to operate. So there's a lot of avenues this really can help the users.
That's a really good point. I want to break down that cost and time savings, but I want to emphasize something that you just said. A lot of these ASCs were not designed for the size of trays and the volumes of orthopedic procedures, and specifically the washer disinfector is not designed for the orthopedic volume. So, this was creating a bottleneck for a lot of ASCs that, to your point, this is part of the efficiency, but you're just making it much more feasible. And storage storage is definitely at a premium in the ASCs. And so how could they possibly continue to ramp up volumes? Like, where are they going to grow? They got to build up or build out. And that's just adding more and more cost, to the system at a time when we're pretty strained for finances in healthcare.
No, you're 100% right. And I love it. And you walk into a surgery center and you're like, I just want a washer. We've got 2 small sterilizers. What kind of cases are you guys at? Oh, we're doing total joints. We're doing ACDFs, T-lifts. Like, we kind of do a little bit of everything here. And it's like, wait, what? How?
How? Yeah.
Well, we do have time, right? They just spend a lot of time. The OR works well too with them to figure out with their cases, how their cases can align to work up with inventory. And it just kind of becomes this, it becomes calculus almost in the OR and SPD trying to figure out how this relationship can work. Whereas if they adopt our technologies, we can kind of eliminate all that and just make it a lot easier for everybody.
So let's dive into cost and time savings. And then I'm going to challenge you a little bit. We're going to dive through some good stories, I think. But cost savings wise, how do you really just look at this, in terms of what we already talked about, less trays? How do you break that down in terms of what the savings? And, most facilities are looking at cost per procedure for the most part. That's how they're evaluating it. So, if you were to give the same example with like the Mako and you're going from 7 trays down to 3 trays, what does that break down in terms of savings? And like this way, people could literally look at their annual case volumes, and say, this is how much money we could save next year if we had flat volumes, and we know that they're going to increase.
Right. No, it's a great question. And I mean, we've kind of looked at a lot of different studies. There's quite a few out there that everybody can kind of get their hands on. And we kind of came to a number of, it's about, I'll say middle of the road across the country, about $75 a tray to process in a blue wrap. That's typically what it is. So with that being said, just using simple math, right? If we're able to take it down to 3 trays instead of 7, you're saving 4 trays times $75 is $300 right there, right off the top. So that's a huge factor in itself. And if you can do that across the board, like you were using your example earlier with, 4 or 5 Makos, and if you're doing 10 cases a day, this adds up really, really quick. Not to mention the time savings that happens too, right? Because it's kind of twofold with our product, which is great, but it also makes it more complex to talk about, obviously, too.
Yeah. Well, that is significant. That's $3,000 a day. If you're doing 10 cases a day, that's $3,000 each day that you're doing those procedures. That is very significant. You talked about the time savings a little bit, where you said, no dry time. Can you break it down a little bit further, just from dry time to cool down, and just give us the real details to total time saved as well? Because to your point, if you've got plenty of rooms, but you're light on equipment for reprocessing, you can get in more cases, if you're not bottlenecked in SPD.
Right. No, great question. So typically what we find is because our cycle is a 4 and 0 cycle used on a 1 tray, with the conditioning phase of the sterilizer and then the sterilization time itself, it's about 18 to 22 minutes. That's pretty standard across the board. Whereas our competitors, when they have 30-minute dry times, but I don't know about you, a lot of the places I go, it seems like that's 40, 50, 60 minutes sometimes to get everything 100% dry with the old sterilizers that they have in their institution. But then you've got the cool down time too, right? We've got to let it get down to ambient temperature. What does that take? Most places that's usually at least an hour, especially when we're talking about orthopedics and the complexity of the procedures and how dense the metal is. So with that being said, we save on average, we find with most of our customers, over 2 hours of total time. That's less wear and tear on sterilizers. No dry times are needed on those. It helps with the washer disinfector as well with the EZ-TRAX because we're going to consolidate the sets and then allow that entire process to be, again, from decontam to ready to be used in the OR at about a total time of an hour and a half between washer disinfector, assembly time, and then SPD, and then processing and transport to the OR. So that's about the total time it takes.
Yeah. And again, take that and multiply it by 10 cases a day. And that's substantial time saved for sure. And it can help support increased volumes. Like we said, it's coming if it hasn't hit already. So you've got to find a way to be able to accommodate that. Okay, let's have some fun. We're about halfway through the interview. So I want to ask you, what are some of the most challenging sets that you've worked with or ones that have had the biggest impact on an organization. And so maybe we can just run this down, because I know we use the Mako as an example, but let's do some more.
Okay. Let's see here. I think the most fun was a primary knee that is, it's a big four, we'll call it, right? I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but it's a big four. They know who they are. But they will deliver or leave consigned 15 trays for a primary knee, not a revision, a primary knee. And they've got a couple different systems they use, but one's 14, one's 15 trays. Now that's all the tibial sizes and everything too, which generally show up regardless of the patient because we've got to be ready for anything, which makes sense. And my favorite with that one is I was working closely with kind of the head of a region with that company. He's like, we have to find a solution. This, facility's asking us to do this. Can you help us? Let's work together collaboratively between the facility, ourselves, and we want to be on the same team. And I said, I love the message. Let's do it. Let's work together. We were able to get it down to 4 trays. So 15
down to 4?
15 to 4. And then I told the guy after we did it, we have this really cool QR code system that they're going to use too for the assembly side. We got them all hooked up with it. Everything's working and running. And I said, okay, now we've got the 1 tray 2 to go. And he's like, I don't understand. This is already as good as it can get. And I said, yeah, but the facility staff, the SPD, they're going to want to kiss you after you use this thing because now you just made their life that much easier. So we did that too. And then their processing time was over 2 hours of savings because they had to run it on 2 to 3 different sterilizers because of how many trays it was when it was wrapped. And then the washer disinfector would take 3 loads to get everything through. Now it's all down to 1. So it's 1 sterilizer. It's 1 washer. It's just a simpler, easier, more efficient system that they can run. And that was a pretty big event. And it took more time than I care to mention to make it work for everybody, but it was well worth it.
You got it down from 15 to 4 trays and still kept those 4 trays underweight?
Yep. Yeah. It was a little bit of a balancing act. I won't lie to you, but we got it to work. And that's including the 1 tray. So it's not being wrapped either. I mean, this is going into a rigid container. So yeah, everybody was smiling ear to ear after those 48 hours of figuring that out. That's for sure.
You said that one was the most fun. So I don't know if that was tongue in cheek or if that was just the one that you had the most fun with because of how good you felt when you got done the project.
I think that was part of it. And I have to admit, I really enjoy working with people and I enjoy working with people that care. And it's rare for me to work with not only an SPD or an OR staffer that's saying, hey, I found a solution. Can you come here, work with our vendor and kind of make this happen? This worked from both ends. The vendor said, I need a solution for my partner, the facility. And the facility said, I need a solution for my partner, the vendor, because without both of us, we can't create the best patient experience and outcome that we can at our facility, which that in itself is a very unique factor. I know there's a lot of jokes in the industry, especially, with the red hats and all that kind of thing that's going around right now. But they truly got it, and they got it together as a team, which was just crucial. So I was happy to come in and help. And that's why it was fun, because you're right. It was probably one of the more stressful ones, that's for sure. But we worked together and just figured it out. And it was great to see both parties want to do it willingly and just, a little give, little take on both ends of it. And it was just great to work with everybody.
Maybe a couple more examples. Go ahead and take biggest impact or most challenging, before we kind of move in. I definitely want to get to a place where we're talking about how to actually implement this and what the process looks like so people can conceptualize what it's like to work with you. But give us a couple more challenging ones or high impact examples.
I'll say the challenging one for me is definitely we worked with a spine navigation company. And I know the Mako has arrays and there's some complexity to that, but I'm pretty used to it because we started this with orthopedics. So I have a lot of experience with orthopedics. And then one day, an SPD manager called me and said, I have to have a solution for this. This navigation system we're using for spine is 6 trays. And some are this big, and then some are just massive. And we have to have a solution. I can't keep running these 6 trays. They're super expensive for us to buy. I can't buy anymore. Can you help us? And it was nice. They're already a 1 tray customer, so that was kind of easy. They were well versed in that, and they said, just organize it. We're going to put it in 1 tray. Don't even worry about that. Just organize it for me. And we took the 6 trays that they had and put it to 1, which was huge. But it was also just great because now they're like, guess what? We're only looking for the 1 tray. They're trying to find the 5. And then they're like, where's the 6? I can't find it. Well, now it's super simple. It's all in 1. So that was that was probably my most challenging, because with some of that instrumentation, like I said, we're not known for our spine. We're kind of just getting into that. It's becoming way more successful than I ever anticipated, which is a great, solution to a problem for sure. But we kind of had the idea of orthopedics as where the home run would be for this to really serve the marketplace. And it's really just kind of in a positive way escalated, which is great.
Do you have any other big ones like 15 down to 4 or close to that one?
Yeah, we did do a shoulder company that's, again, I don't like throwing anybody under the bus, but it's probably one of the top 3 in the country in terms of total sales. And it was 13 trays to 3. So not quite, 15 to 4, I guess, depending on how you look at it, but 13 to 3 is still amazing. And even in another one of their systems, we were able to do 11 to 2. Now, that's a little different between anatomic and reverse for the shoulder, but neither here nor there. If you can take anything and take it from 13 trays to 3, it becomes a pretty big home run. It was a nice experience. I did get a little bit more shoulder knowledge because it's a little different than some of the other total procedures that are out there. But yeah, that was a huge wake up call and widely successful. And now we're able to replicate that everywhere else, because every time we do one of these layouts, we've got it available to use it again. So in theory, we don't have to do quite as much work on our end. Maybe we customize it for the surgeon, which is okay if need be, or just create a layout for the facility. But that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, the layout examples, we're going to have that available as bonus content. So we're going to talk about that too as we talk about how easy this is. But what I love about the layout examples, to your point, is you can kind of have a starting point. Like, even if you do have to customize it for a surgeon, at least it gets them thinking like, this is along the lines of what it would look like, or, hey, that looks great, just do that. So as you're building that library, phenomenal. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to have some layout examples as a PDF bonus content if you have downloaded the Beyond Clean app for your smartphone. So let's talk about this implementation, because I know it starts with the layout example. So you teed me up really well there for where we're going next. But all right, so they say, yes, I want 15 trays down to 4, or I want 13 trays down to 3, but I wouldn't even know where to begin. These layout examples give you a great starting point, and you're continuing to build that library. So start there and say, okay, I'm meeting with, the OR, the SPD, to start, and maybe the vendor as well, to start the optimization project. Kick us off. You're getting into the meeting. Where do you start?
Yeah, so it just kind of comes down to asking the very simple question of, what are you having problems with? What are you doing every day? What makes life difficult? And everybody's really open about what are the pressure points and how can that be solved. And the nice part is, when it comes to complex procedures or even simple procedures and just needing to create and optimize efficiency, that's what our 3 suite of products can really do to help. So it all starts there. It's just being upfront and honest, laying the cards on the table, because I'm not invested at this point with anything. We're just having a conversation. Let's just talk. Maybe we have the answers, maybe we don't. And majority of the time we definitely have the answers, which is great, but we just sit and talk, and then we start working with the vendor, and we'll work with the staff, get everybody on the same page, and then educate all the staff members, make sure the layouts work, and then we'll do on-site implementation if they decide to go that direction. And once they do it, we'll be able to help if there is something that needs to be, changed versus our normal layouts that we quote unquote use. I'll say is like a benchmark, so that if, they're using a different broaching system, then we'll switch, we'll do the offset broach handles instead of the straights or whatever that might be, and make those small changes. And then help them with, if they want to use our QR code, which is an assembly tool that shows the location of every instrument, catalog number, ID, all that kind of thing, they can use that. If not, we'll help them with EZ-TRAX, SPM, Abacus, whichever their organization is, if they'd like. And then make sure everybody feels comfortable, educate, and just watch it go down the road and create a whole new wave of processing that they never had the opportunity to have before us.
Yeah, like you said before, the alternative is a wire basket and just dumping all the instruments in there in a disorganized fashion. So obviously it can be a better process. I just want to highlight what you said, and you mentioned it earlier, just how important it can be to engage the vendor representative from the company and just getting their buy-in, because like you said, especially on some of the bigger ones, or maybe where you haven't developed a layout yet, you're really going to need their involvement to just understand even how the instruments, I'm assuming, are coming out during the case, in what order they're being used. Like there's some considerations there that you really need the experience of the vendor representative to guide through that. But as you build this library of examples of these layouts, obviously it's kind of like, hey, we have something. So once you've done it once, you're in really great shape to scale it out to other customers.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. And don't get me wrong. And we talked about the Mako at the beginning. Are there different layouts of it? Absolutely. As a whole, is it pretty similar from facility to facility? Yeah, there's a couple of things here or there, nuances that change. But for the most part, it stays that way. And a lot of people think of this process as being extremely cumbersome too. Well, Kyle, it sounds great, but now we have to work with the vendor. I have to work with the OR. We have to work with the SPD, make sure everybody knows what's going on. And, that's what I'm here for. So that's literally my whole job, is to help make sure that from A to Z, this process goes smoothly. And I do it every week, which is great. But that way it's not burdened on, SPD leadership, OR leadership. The vendors, sometimes they try to put things on. It's like, no, I get it. You don't do it every day, and change is tough. Very sympathetic to that. I understand it, but just let us know. Give me a heads up. We'll communicate. The vendors want this to work. They want their life to be easier. And that's all this turns out being, is making not only SPD's life easier and the OR and the surgeon, but if the vendor can find their trays and locating them to set them up for the next case, and there's only 2 or 3, and they can reset their trays in 4 minutes instead of 20 because they're looking around the entire department trying to find all 15 of them, it changes the ball game. So they want to help. They want to be there. And you're right. They're integral to this process, because without their buy-in, we can't get this done. So we'll work to make it happen and make life easy for everybody.
Well, I love that you're willing to shoulder that burden, because you're right. With those workforce challenges like we talked about, taking on big projects like this just often seems elusive for many organizations. And so for you to be able to come in and just augment that need, and then be able to give them the time back and the cost savings back that they're starving for in this day and age, but without them having to put all that effort and energy into getting it there, it seems like a pretty easy win, honestly. And so I want to let everybody know that they can reach out to you for assistance in achieving these efficiencies. So go ahead and get on the smartphone app, or click the link in the description for this podcast and take a look at some of these layout examples so you can see just the enormous impact that this is going to have on your organization. And then reach out to Kyle and schedule a time to sit down and start talking about it. What steps need to be going into place, especially if you're an existing One Tray customer. This is a no-brainer. Call Kyle today. If you're not an existing One Tray customer, call Kyle and figure out how you can be, and then work EZ-TRAX and the efficiencies into your day-to-day processes, because there's just an enormous amount of demand on this. Kyle, how can they reach you in particular?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. I try to be as active as anybody and be able to help people out, and then just share the progress and success that we've had. But then also, you can call me, text me, email me, all that kind of stuff. And we'll be happy to help communicate and see how we can make this work for you.
All right. Like Kyle said, not only he, but also One Tray is on LinkedIn and Facebook. You can email them info@onetray.com. You can call 937-619-0138. So make sure, as always, follow the One Tray and EZ-TRAX IFUs for use. Kyle, great job today. Great job just every day. Anything you want to add before we wrap up the conversation?
No, I think the biggest thing is kind of what we hit on last, is if you can look through this process and understand what we're talking about and how there is a better way, don't think of it as a hurdle you have to get over yourself. There's other people out there who'd be more than happy to help and make this transition as easy as possible, because that seems to be the biggest downside I see, is like you said, we save money, we save time, we make the patient's lives better, and we make the staff that utilize the products and just a lot easier and more efficient. So the only real hurdle at that point is finding the information, the resources, and implementing it. So I'd be happy to help. The rest of my team, we're always here to help and make it as easy as we can so this transition's smooth and simple. And or to just kind of afford you an opportunity that you may not have had before in efficiency.
All right, as Kyle said, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn and connect for assistance in how you can achieve the efficiencies that we talked about in today's podcast. You can also follow IST1Tray on LinkedIn and Facebook. And if you do want to connect with somebody directly with the organization, you can email them info@onetray.com. Just make sure you mention that you heard about it on today's podcast. And as always, follow the OneTray and EZ-TRAX IFUs for use. That was Kyle Kemp, National Director of Business Development with IST1Tray. We were talking about all the ways that you can achieve significant efficiencies. I think my favorite, honestly, well, there were a couple, but 15 trays down to 4 trays is substantial. So is 6 trays down to 1. $3,000 a day if you get your Mako system from 7 trays down to 3 and you're doing 10 cases a day. That is definitely going to add up over the course of the year. But for all of those ASCs out there that are listening to this podcast, you know, in many cases, the equipment that you have set up is just not able to support the increase in orthopedics that is being done in that setting and where you're working every single day. And the amount of bottlenecks that can happen at the equipment is significant. So OneTray and EZ-TRAX can be a big part of that total solution for you. As I mentioned, we're going to have these EZ-TRAX set layouts available as a download on the smartphone app for iPhone and Android. But if you haven't downloaded the smartphone app or you want to go to a URL, here you go. It's onetray.com/EZ-TRAX-set-layout-library. And as always, thank you everyone for listening to this vendor spotlight on Beyond Clean.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.